A couple things. So when you speak, we need to make sure that you turn on your microphone and speak into the microphone. We're having trouble getting some of the minutes because of that. So if we can make sure that we do that. And then the other thing is we need to end this meeting at noon. Because Jackie and I have some other meetings that we could attend. So I don't think we'll take that long, but just so everybody knows, I'd like to make sure we get through all the content for the agenda. So start with introductions. Eric, why don't you start?
Eric Butler. I represent the Parks and Rec Board.
Nancy Eichstad.
Justin Prouty, PGE Forestry.
Linda Cosgrove.
Linda, I think you have to get closer.
Linda Cosgrove.
Kim Baller, Gladstone interested resident.
Sandy Ditmar, Gladstone resident.
Brittany Oxford, Community Assistance Forester with the Department of Forestry.
Darren Canaproli, Public Works Director.
And Jackie Batts, City Administrator.
So the last time we met, we had talked about the community survey questions and stuff like that. I believe we had handed out, is that accurate, Jackie, or do we still need to hand out the sample questions that? Okay, so I knew we had handed it out. Does everyone have a copy of that with?
And I did make extras, so. These were the generic sample questions. If anybody else want one? Let's just pass them around. Hey, Chris.
I think we need another one.
Yeah, I got some more here.
So we had talked about putting out a survey to the public. And we talked about questions. There wasn't a lot of questions that were brought up at the last meeting. But we want to kind of get this finalized going forward so that we can get a survey of some sort out. If you guys would like to take a look at this, and if there's any questions you would like to add to this, that would be extremely helpful.
Submit those to Kristen.
Yeah, I think it'd probably be best if we could just submit everything to either myself or Kristen, and then we can compile that list. And then at the next meeting, we'll bring that list and then decide it. I'd like to finalize it at the next meeting if we could, to get compile a list of everybody's questions that are on top of any of these questions. And then we can finalize that list at the next meeting of what we're going to put in the survey. That way we can get a survey out to everybody. So I think that would probably be the easiest way to do that, unless anybody else has any other suggestions with that.
So let me think back. Our timeline was we're not meeting July 5th because of the holiday, correct?
I believe that is correct, but I believe we're meeting the 12th, which is that Monday, isn't it? No, the following Friday.
The 12th.
12th.
So we're meeting with the city council on July 25th or 6th.
Yeah.
Is it July? July 23rd, for session.
Okay, so is it it is July. I was wrong. And I think Kristen sent out a clarifying email in between meetings, and it is July. So is the intent to have the survey done before we go to the city council work session? Or is the intent to do it after the work session?
Well, the work session is to talk about the tree board in general and what our purpose is, and the ordinance, the draft ordinance that we should have by then. And I would say that we could, if we have the questions for that, by then we can present them. If not, we can push that out after that.
So do the survey after our work session because we know we're going back to council again in October.
Mhm.
And that gives us time to solicit input from the community on that. Okay, I just wanted to understand the timeline. Okay, so the homework assignment then is to finalize what questions Marcy's gonna put together in a community survey. And we're going to launch that in July. We could still start it after our July 12th meeting. We just won't have results.
Right, correct.
Okay. I think that's a good plan.
Could I go back just a little bit? I'm sorry, I wasn't here last week, but, or last month. How are we telling people why we're doing this? Do we have a goal with our tree board and our tree survey that we're trying to reach that is like overarching? Did you guys ever talk about that? And I know that Tree City USA is one of our goals, but what are we trying to do in Gladstone? And that language might end up being at the top of the survey.
Well, the main focus for this group is to create an ordinance that we don't currently have, because we need to have that in place for the Tree City USA. The Tree City USA stuff. So once we get the ordinance in place, we'll have, we still have to come up with a possible list of trees that are going to need to be not part of the ordinance, but an exhibit to the ordinance. So it's kind of, we need to, the reason we're doing all of this is for the Tree City USA, but we've also got to there's milestones that we have to get through. And the main one is the ordinance, because that's going to be going to the council in June, the draft of that.
Yeah, I get that. I know that's why we did it. And Brittany, maybe you can help a little bit with this, but we're not creating an ordinance just to have an ordinance. We're creating an ordinance because we want the city's tree canopy to be appropriate or something like that. I'm sorry.
I thought it was to increase the tree canopy.
Yeah, okay, so now we're getting there, Brittany.
Oh, I was just gonna say, in the draft ordinance, there is a section at the top that says purpose. And in here for Gladstone, it says to enhance the quality of life and the present and future health, safety, and welfare of all residents, to enhance property values and to ensure proper planting and care of trees on public property. The city council herein delegates the authority and responsibility for managing public trees, establishes practices governing the planting and care of trees on public property, and makes provision for the emergency removal of trees on private property under certain conditions. So I think that's a good starting place as far as like the reason why we're drafting an ordinance, and that's usually where an ordinance starts, is the purpose. So thanks for pointing that out.
That sounds really good. That's what we need to be talking about, probably to the public. Thank you. Do I have a copy of that?
It was in the packet.
It's in this packet that we're going over today.
So Nancy, are you suggesting that for the survey itself, it would be important to start that with a purpose of the survey?
Yes.
Yeah, agreed.
Yes, so people understand why it's coming at them and they can start to think about what are the reasons I need to address this in my neighborhood.
I would just say, looking through these, I think they're good questions. They kind of cover all the main bases. I see it for like a, community engagement portion of, these questions here. I do like it's mentioned on their rating scales. I think that's pretty important to say, like, out of these objectives, whether it's, beautification, environmental impacts, property values, whatever, like some type of rating there, just like broadly to give just an overall sense of what Gladstone residents care about the most for their trees.
And we also have learned that people don't participate in large surveys. So that's why I think if you keep it to 10 or less questions, you're more apt to get them involved with that. We'd even talked about maybe having a gift or a prize, and we can certainly do that, a drawing, to get people to participate in it. And I'll work with Marcy on that piece of it. But I know you've got to be concise with your wording and specific, so there's a reason that people want and can understand why they're filling this out.
So can the city put an announcement in the monthly newsletter that goes out to residents, that talks about this a little bit and then has a link to the survey?
Yeah, that'll be part of the community engagement process. Is we'll do the newsletter, social media, the website. So we'll hit all of those avenues after this group finalizes the questions.
Will there be a timing problem with when we finalize the questions and when the newsletter is printed to be able to get that in there and when we want the answers? Is there a timeline problem?
It'd be, the survey and the newsletter would then be out in the August newsletter.
Yes,
what
if
we
you
thought.
approve the questions at the July meeting, which is July 12th, we have till July 18th to get content in for the August newsletter. So we should be fine.
Would that be good timing for doing in-person engagement at the summer thing? I'm suddenly forgetting the name of
Community festival.
community festival. That's right.
Yeah, that is definitely possible. That's in the first part of August, so.
I think if the city has a booth, we can certainly have copies of the survey there. And because Marcy and I usually staff that booth. And so that is something that, yeah, we can engage people at the festival as well.
So are you mailing this questionnaire out enclosed in the city newspaper? Or,
No, there'll be an article about it and a link for people to access.
so
us
it'll
to
be an
take.
online survey?
Yes, but they can also have, we typically will have paper copies like at the library, the community center here. So there's options for people if they want to do a paper survey as well.
Are we going to discuss the trees that were selected on this flyer? 'Cause
That,
I had some comments about that.
that's not finalized. That is the current tree list that the city of Gladstone currently has. As part of the ordinance, an exhibit to that will be an updated tree list to go along with that. But the idea is to get the ordinance done first, then come back with the tree list to attach to that.
And who's going to be updating that tree list?
That's what we're here for.
That we will, okay. Because I noticed on that list, there's no evergreens. It's all deciduous, and which means a lot more work for the city in the fall
Yes.
and
And
expense.
that list is quite dated, so. Anything else on the survey?
Our comments should be sent to who?
Either myself or Kristen,
Okay.
and we'll compile all of that, and bring that to the next meeting. Okay. We'll move on to item number 3, which is discuss the website content. We had sent this out, I believe it was prior to our last meeting, or maybe it was right after our last meeting. I'm not sure 100%, but and then we had some people that had some questions about the content of this. So we're looking to finalize or get any additional things that you would all like to see on the ad hoc tree board portion of the website. This is just draft right now. It's not published. So once we get everything the way that we want it, we'll end up publishing that for everyone to be able to see. I was wondering if anybody had a chance to go through that information that we provided and if there were any comments you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. My name's still spelled wrong. And two things I was wondering if we could add at the bottom. One of them is we've got our preferred tree species list. I wondered if we could add the state's, just a link to it, the state's noxious plant list. And I have a copy of that page here. I was looking for just a bad tree list, ones that we don't want to have planted. But this is pretty robust and comprehensive, and it does include the bad trees like holly and the tree of heaven, which grows all over Gladstone. And that would just be a link at the end. And then I think we talked about this once, but the Portland plant list is also a great resource just for people working on their yards and stuff. And that would be a link too. And those would never need to be updated. They're just links to other sites that somebody else is in charge of keeping updated.
We have the state's noxious tree list. And the Portland, what was it called, Nancy?
Sorry, the Portland plant list. And you can just Google it and it comes right up.
Thank you.
I wonder if instead of the Gladstone list, which, as was mentioned, is pretty outdated, it says 2.5 to 3 foot wide strip. That's pretty darn narrow. If Clackamas County has a list and include that instead, because we'll probably end up extracting from that list for Gladstone. Yeah. Okay.
So Sandy, are you talking about removing all of this here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but adding the list that Clackamas County has or a link to it. And it divides different widths of planting strips. Because that's where people's focus is going to be, is on what would be in front of their house. Yes, they're concerned about the parks too, but I think that's where, when you start talking about this, that's where people's minds are going to go, is what's out in front of their street.
I had a similar thought. If we're not outright removing it, at least referencing that this is like subject to being updated or something like that, because we've all acknowledged, right? It's pretty outdated, pretty narrow in the trees that are in here.
I think providing links to the ODF Urban Community Forestry page would be good too. And the U.S. Forest Service has a lot of great urban community forestry stuff on their website as well.
Thanks, Eric. That's what I was gonna add. But also there's a Emerald Ash Borer information website that might be useful to include. And I can share those links.
So Brittany, you can share both of those.
Yep.
That was a nice plug, Eric. Thank you.
And I wonder if we could add a link to some information about the white oak savanna, since Gladstone is a white oak savanna. I just came down here and somebody was chopping a white oak tree on Oakfield Road, which makes me ill. And I'll have to find what the best link to that would be, because there's a lot of information out there about that habitat.
Maybe OSU Extension or.
On Gloucester, between Portland Avenue and 99, someone else cut down a very old oak. My guess is probably 300-year-old oak. And it's sitting there in the front lawn right now. So
That's
I'm just
right across,
wondering,
yeah, that's right across the street from me. It broke my heart.
does the city, does the ordinance that the city is going to be, adopting, the one that we're working on, is that going to prevent something like that? Or will it?
Not if it's on private property. Yeah, this ordinance is only to govern public, public right of way, which does affect property owners that have trees in the public right of way. But it is difficult when it's on private property. We don't propose doing that with this ordinance.
Another thing is, I'm wondering if we want to add a survey link to the tree board website for the community survey that we're drafting. That could be a good place.
And as I'm looking through the kind of, I guess this is part of the recommended street trees. Some of the recommendations for planting and stuff like that, I don't know that they're that helpful, or like they seem a little bit like scary, I guess. They're talking a lot about like the damage and the problems and the things that reasons you wouldn't want trees. So if the goal is to kind of get the community on board with this, I think, it just talks about infrastructure, clogged gutters, destroying your house sort of stuff. Maybe we could, and that would be maybe, myself and Brittany and Eric, they're kind of coming from the industry. Maybe we could find some resources there from the ISA or, somewhere that has a little bit more clear and updated guidelines for tree planting selection.
I guess I'm curious for the updating the street tree list, Darren. Do we have a specific work session for that? Like making recommendations to it, or, because I have a lot of resources and the state actually is putting together a statewide street tree list with the different categories that are filterable and helpful. That there's like a advisory board being put together and is finalizing that and in the process of it. So I have access to a lot of drafts of street tree lists. Yeah, I'm just curious.
We don't currently have anything scheduled.
Okay.
for council.
Great.
Well, we could schedule though for this group. You could, if you got the survey and the draft ordinance done in July, either the August meeting or September meeting, we could focus on the list.
So first is survey, then is draft ordinance, then is list.
Yeah,
That's
I
great.
think that works.
Anything more? Anything more for the website?
Justin, I had a question when you were talking about, were you talking about this verbiage being removed as well?
Yeah, or again, at least updated.
Okay.
I was wondering about the paragraph, the short at the end that says arborists recommend street trees be replaced every 15 to 25 years. I mean, if I lived, if I had a street tree in front of my place, or if I was contemplating, I might not even plant one if that, it's only gonna last 15 years. Why do I want to go to all these expense? So I just wonder, where did that figure come from? It's unfamiliar to me.
Yeah, or it's like you have to take the tree down before it becomes big enough to matter.
I'm not sure where that came from. I don't know if that was part of the tree list. Because it looks like it follows through with the trees and then the,
I saw that in several of the documents that we've had drafts from the other cities and stuff. And I made a point last time that tree is a half a dozen years old before you even plant it. And 20 years just isn't very long. But with the narrow parking strips that exist in a lot of the neighborhoods, that's what you need. That's what you have to have.
But where did that number come from is what I'm curious about. It doesn't seem like we should be putting a number like that across when we don't know how it was, how someone came up with that. Doesn't seem true to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that number came from.
It seems like that's kind of assuming that you're planting full-size trees as well, and is essentially kind of a size management thing. So if you're planting trees that are appropriately sized for the site, then maybe that doesn't apply.
Anyway, I think that should be taken out from the new ordinance, that number.
I think it's more related to, that's kind of I think the average life for a street tree is something like 15 years, because they do have a tough life, so it just may be some.
Well,
Bad
I mean,
verbiage there.
we shouldn't be doing something to some supposition or,
Are we recommending permits for tree removal?
For, for anything that will be in the right of way, yes, we will have a removal.
So that
permit
language-
And a replanting of that.
So I-
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna make one more suggestion for the website, before we move on from that. Nancy had, asked about purpose and mission and goal. Maybe it would be good to have a statement at the top that's like why we're doing this. And I'd be happy to help draft some of that.
So I think for purposes of the website, we want to have the purpose of the ad hoc board, what their roles and responsibilities are, and then links to resources. And that's really it until we've had an opportunity to go through and update the tree list. Is that a consensus from the group? And to spell Nancy's name correctly on there.
I wonder where the the source of the updated tree list is gonna be coming from. Because, I mean, we all have different expertises, but I wonder is the city interested in paying someone who can provide something like that, who has maybe more experience than we do?
I think the state actually is that's what Brittany's gonna be able to provide us, is a draft of what they're working on right now of recommended tree lists. I think that's the information that we're gonna start with.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, so we have the state's recommended tree list by region. And we can also look at the county's list and other lists in the area, and then make decisions as the group as far as like what makes sense. I do think it's a good idea to have Gladstone specific list that is referenced in the ordinance.
And I'm still working on, I've been very disappointed. I have contacts with growers that are on committees in different cities in the area. That could explain a lot and really give me a lot of guidance with helping to steer some of this, but I'm not getting responses from them. And I've been very frustrated, and I'm ready to make another round at it.
Oh, and lastly, just one small thing, in the, what is the tree board? I think it's referenced as Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife when it should be Department of Forestry. And maybe putting urban and community forestry program.
Sandy, I have a couple of personal connections with growers, so let me know your information you're trying to get. I can make the connection.
Sandy, I wonder if the Oregon Nursery Association might be a good stop for you.
They would send me to the people that aren't calling me back. I'm still working on it.
I think the Oregon Nursery Association also, I believe a majority of the plants that are grown in Oregon are actually grown to be shipped to the East Coast and other places like that, that there's very few nurseries that are really growing climate adapted plants that would do really well here over the long term. A lot of plants, you know, that, I mean, I think we're all aware that are sold are ones that, you know, do require summer irrigation.
Growers do ship a lot of plants east of the Mississippi because that's where a lot of people live.
Yep.
There's more population, so there's more plants sent that way. But there are a lot of plants sold on the West Coast too, and they're grown for those purposes.
Does anybody have anything more for website content? Okay, let's move on to number 4, which is review the draft ordinance that's in the packet. So this ordinance is based off of the ordinance from Independence, and there was also, what was the county? Polk County and Independence, and then we reviewed this to see if this is would work in Gladstone, which it should work in Gladstone. And I don't know if you guys have had time to go through this since we put the packet out, but I'd like to discuss any possible changes or anything like that on the ordinance.
I had a question on number 9, when it comes to the exceptions for frontage properties on McLaughlin Boulevard. Part of it, it says the use of sod along McLaughlin may be allowed in lieu of street trees.
Sure, that is.
I was wondering if we're trying to encourage street trees. That's commercial property. They should be able to afford trees.
What page are you on?
No page, oh.
I think you have a different document here. I peered over at your stuff and it's different than what I'm looking at.
So what are you looking at?
Should
I
be.
can't see your viewer.
We have a paper copy of the draft.
It was part of the packet.
That's just the municipal.
Yeah, see, this has my name on it, so I know I picked it up.
What's the title of the section?
And it would have been in the one that was in the manila envelope that you picked up. And I think you picked up 2 packets.
I did, yes,
It would have
yeah.
been the one in the manila envelope.
Well, I no longer have that envelope.
Are those copies of the ordinance?
I think
So, chapter 17.46, it says landscaping, applicability standards, and so forth, parking and loading areas.
Have one more. Does anybody else in the case with cobble that can make more? That helps.
Stopping and pruning. Public tree care, planting standards. Removal adjustment. So this isn't included in this draft that was just handed to me. But it's under the ordinances that were given to me through the window. Gladstone's current code ordinances 1526 passed on October 10, 23. So
I
with-
think that was an ordinance that exists now, not a tree ordinance that we're working on. And I don't remember the name of it, but I remember reading what that was handed out at some point, but it's not the tree ordinance.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's the planning stuff.
Well, it came through the windows, so can't tell you. So what are the ordinances for McLaughlin Boulevard? If this is not vague.
Well, McLaughlin Boulevard would be state highway. So that's not technically our right of way on McLaughlin Boulevard. That would be ODOT's right of way.
So we're not addressing that. Okay.
I'll just say something that kind of stood out from the utility standpoint. It talked about planting distances. And so tree planting standards 5, letter D, it says no tree shall be placed within 10 lateral feet of any overhead utility wire, unless it's a small tree. I think 10 might be a little bit close. If we plant a Doug fir 10 feet laterally from the power lines, we're certainly going to be trimming that. I mean, it's manageable. But some other broadleaf trees, you're gonna get that kind of L shape out of a Oregon white oak, for example, or any kind of maple, anything along those lines. We'll be potentially still doing significant work on some of those trees. So it's hard to give like an exact number of what would say we won't prune these, and we can always, continue to prune trees and manage things, but to minimize impact, we might want to increase that number or change the verbiage somehow to give a little more discretion to the city in that regard. And we can always help as the utility, helping if you have questions about planting. 5 subsection D at the very bottom, under tree planting standards.
I think since it's sometimes very species specific, like what you're saying, Justin, it could also make sense to include that as like a column in the species list of like which species you can plant underneath power lines within the city. So that's one approach that I've seen other communities take. But yeah, maybe having just a minimum and then having the species recommendation is a good way to move around that.
The Clackamas County list, one of their columns is under overhead wires, yes or no?
Yeah, and I think that is kind of addressed here, the under. I think when we're talking about planting the sides, it still has like potentially a lot of impact from our trimming. And I think the best outcome is like we have big mature trees that get to grow to their full potential without us, coming through and doing what's necessary to keep the lights on.
So what is the height limit that you would like to see under power lines?
Well, it's
20.
more, yeah, I think you have the small trees or something that are, what do they say? A small tree is considered, I mean, even you can plant plenty of medium trees as designated in the draft as it is now. It's more the lateral distance that I have a hard time with, and I can't really give like a hard and fast number for that, right? Because there's so many different trees that could potentially be planted. I mean, and these are good guidelines for even people's private property. I have lots of people who are mad at me saying, "Oh, I planted that tree 15 feet away from the power line, so why are you cutting it?" It's like, well, the limbs are 25 or 20 feet long, so here we are. I'll think about that.
Yeah, it sounds like that's something that might make more sense to be included as information in the tree list.
I have a question in that same section, number 5A. No tree planted closer than 5 feet from the curb unless it has a root guard. You're not gonna get a 10-foot planting strip, so you're basically requiring everything planted to have a root guard. Is that not what that says?
Well, it would depend on the size of the planter strip, but, and sometimes sometimes there's right of way that does not have a planter strip. So, if there's a 7-foot or 10-foot right of way from the curb, you wouldn't be able to plant that within 5 feet of that curb is basically what it's saying without a root guard.
Can you say that again? To me, it says close, not closer than 5 feet to any curb. So
What-
if any curb, so if there's a sidewalk on the other side of the planting strip, you're gonna have a 10-foot wide strip if you planted it in the middle, correct?
You would have to install a root guard on the curb side of that is what that's saying.
And the sidewalk side,
If you're. gonna-
most likely.
more
I mean,
likely,
it's,
yeah.
you know. So would it be easier just to say if you're gonna plant a street tree, you're gonna have a root guard?
Again, though, I think, like Darren was saying, if there's a right of way without an inside sidewalk that's more than 5 feet wide, you can plant that more than 5 feet away from the edge of the street without a root guard. So if there's a right of way that extends like 6 feet onto your lawn, you could plant that between 5 and 6 feet and not have to do anything.
So should we, do you think it's necessary to do some clarification of the wording there? Or just, it's okay as is?
I mean, maybe I think it probably ends up amounting to the same thing.
I think in most ordinances, I do see it worded this way where it's minimum distances from gray infrastructure. So I think that's consistent and that's what I would suggest. As far as like recommendations for what those actual distances should be, I think Public Works should be in agreement. But also I'd be happy to bring this to my whole team and get recommendations because a lot of them used to be urban foresters in other cities that have worked with trees in those specific places. So they might have input that I can bring back to the group.
Are we including parks with these? I know we have park rules about planting and removal, but people don't look at them and don't care about them. So would it be smart to just include the word city parks in some of this language? I'm looking at let's see, delegation and responsibility, authority and power. You've got, oh, here we got city parks. It's there, sorry.
I did also have another thought about pruning. It might be beneficial to differentiate between major and minor pruning, especially for homeowners being responsible for doing the pruning work. You wouldn't want a homeowner doing any major pruning without an arborist. So I think there's ways that we can add that language in and that I can also help make recommendations for there.
It was discussed earlier that we wanted to have a requirement of a licensed professional, and I don't see that mentioned in here. So that kind of goes along with some of what you were saying, or did I miss it?
I think that is.
I know I saw that in here as well.
Like I think in removal and in some places there are.
Yeah, it's on removal of trees, 1 subsection B, last sentence. It's hard to see.
Mm.
And in C. So the licensed arborist language is primarily in the removal of trees area.
Yeah, I think maybe making it clear that the removal of trees, I know it does say trees can't be removed except for like these following exceptions in that section, but maybe just saying that like in those exceptions, making it clear that like the removal still needs to be done by either the city or an arborist. And, the permit process, I guess, being outlined.
Yeah, I had thoughts there on letter C. It says that the condition of the tree must be confirmed in writing by a licensed arborist. I think that term licensed arborist, unless you're talking about like a tree care, like someone who actually does tree work, you might want to say a certified arborist, which means you have like an ISA or ASCA kind of credential. And then maybe outlining somewhere what the standards for those reports were being. It's like, because if then it could be some guy just comes in, writes something, then says the tree's dangerous and turns it into you. And so having some standards to guide your staff on like what's an acceptable arborist report, what's an acceptable threshold might help narrow things down in the future.
Yeah, so I think adding language like an ISA certified arborist is a great idea. And specifically for C, there's also a tree risk assessment qualification and standards that could be added there.
So that's under definitions.
That's under removal of trees. 1 subsection C.
So instead of having licensed arborist, we want to change it to ICA certified arborist throughout the document, correct?
Yeah, I think you have it certified arborist. I don't know, Brittany or Eric, if you want to chime in there. It's certified arborist.
Yeah, certified instead of licensed would be better language.
ISA certified?
I mean, I would recommend ISA
Yeah.
certified. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I guess you could be a member of ASCA and not a member of ISA.
It's
I've just
not
never
ideal.
met anyone who's
Yeah.
done that.
The sort of standard in the industry is International Society of Arboriculture or ISA. So that's what I would suggest. Another question I had is if we're like homeowners who are responsible for street trees in the right of way, if they wanted to plant a tree, is there an approval process for that?
Well, yeah, I think we need to. I think they have
Mhm.
to have a permit, just so that we know what's being planted.
Yeah. Is there a place in the ordinance currently for that?
I don't know that there is anything as far as that. I made a note of that too.
Okay.
Is the permit process. And I think that's gonna go for removal of the tree as well as planting of the tree.
Another thing I noticed under removal of trees, item G, it talks about no removal of historic or landmark trees, but that term or these terms aren't defined anywhere. I know that we're kind of talking about a heritage tree program too, but it'd be I think it'd be helpful to define that just so that there's no ambiguity or conflict around that.
Yeah, I think since Gladstone currently doesn't have a heritage tree or significant tree, do you have a program?
We have one certified
Oh,
tree.
that's a state program.
And that's why that language is in there because of the powwow tree.
Oh, is that through the Travel Information Council's heritage tree?
I thought it was the Oregon.
It's a landmark.
Because-
Yeah,
yeah.
it is a state landmark.
So then we should just define that. You're right, Eric, I think.
That to replace the Abernathy elm. But that's in Oregon City, so. I think there's two ways of defining historic tree, and one is that it's just a really big specimen that's old, and another is that it was planted by a person who's famous. If you look at the statutes, you have to go through a whole process. Oatfield Road has like a whole bunch of sequoias that are registered on some county website, but it's not anything really official, but it's kind of fun to look at the history of those.
I guess I had something that I wanted to bring up, and I don't know, under the section about dead, diseased or hazardous trees, I have seen quite a few ordinances that specifically only address publicly like owned trees in their ordinance, but then they have a section in there that says the city has the right to remove hazardous, dead, diseased, or dying trees that are on private property.
I thought there was something in there that had.
On private property? Oh, maybe I missed it.
I believe that's F under removal of
Oh,
trees.
yep. Great. Well, it's good that that's in there.
They might not like it. And I guess that's part of why we're trying to engage the community in input.
I'm just
because it
thinking
does
about
affect some private property owners.
something that's really heavy on my mind is the emerald ash borer. We're gonna have a lot of dead ash trees coming soon that are gonna cause a real hell. No, I mean, it's, I wish it wasn't true, but
You think it's coming this way? I mean, Forest Grove.
I
is
think
where-
it's inevitable, with how prolific it is, and how destructive it is. It's like the most destructive pest in the United States. So, it would be unlikely if we were able to contain it or, I mean, the strategy that the state has is to slow ash mortality, keep it contained for as long as we can to buy communities time to prepare for it. But I think it is inevitable that it will affect everyone at some point.
So the lesson is don't plant ash trees.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything more on the ordinance?
I guess I also had a question about the where is it? 1 second. Violations and penalty. How do violations and penalties usually work and in Gladstone, and how did you get to the number of $500? I guess I'm just curious.
That is what the other cities imposed on that.
Oh, okay, in Independence.
Yeah, and it's a misdemeanor, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would offer, with maybe not wanting to get too far on the wrong side of your residence, $500, pretty low, considering like the cost of removal of a tree is like thousands potentially. So if somebody really wants the tree out, they just might consider it the cost of doing business.
Yeah, I think that some approaches that I've seen is like the actual appraised value for the tree. So if someone removes a tree illegally, then they would have to pay the appraised value of that tree and replace it. So that's one way that one approach I've seen in ordinances. There's a couple of different ways to go about the actual like violations and penalty section. I'm just, I guess, exploring other ordinances in that specific
Yeah.
realm and what might make sense here.
So looking at my notes, that language was also taken from the sample ODF ordinance that we got.
The Tree City sample
Yes.
from the Arbor Day Foundation?
Yes.
Okay.
But we can explore options if
Mhm.
you want to.
Yeah, I just feel like $500 is kind of, especially if it's like developers or other people that are in violation of could be, pretty low barrier for going against the ordinance.
Just a clarification, this would be separate from sidewalk maintenance,
As far
would it
as,
not? Well, you got a problem tree that's upheaved the sidewalks. And so you're fined whatever amount we come up with because you didn't get that tree out. And then the sidewalk repair, that comes under other ordinances that the city has.
correct.
Does the city have in their planning or land use codes have other standards involving trees for like developing and stuff? This is a private property thing, so it might be outside the scope of what we're doing here. Just kind of curious how that works.
I think the only thing would be with the planning process that I'm aware of. We can look at that to see. But typically, I think all of that runs through the planning process. So the planning code that we gave the last time would cover that, but we'd have to look. Or I'd have to look.
Yeah, it's just, it might be an option as a way to try to expand canopy over the years, as people, tear down single family houses and build multi-family units and things like that, and having tree requirement, planting things. I might be derailing the conversation a little bit here, but I find planning and just these general tree ordinance things kind of go hand in hand in a lot of cities.
Sneak out. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.
I have a question. I know you don't know the answer, Darren. I want to go back to McLaughlin. The people that live past Gladstone complain all the time that there's not enough tree coverage along McLaughlin. And you're saying that Gladstone, City of Gladstone can't have any jurisdiction over the car dealerships and what they put in down there.
As far as right of way is concerned.
Okay, because when they did Oregon City and the bridge and they did that next to the mall, all those lovely trees got planted on either side. So maybe that was state money, maybe they could be encouraged.
Well, and I think that the planning code would be part of that as well. So if somebody were to come in with a new business or a new whatever, and they're going to redevelop a parcel of land, the planning code in cooperation with ODOT would have that jurisdiction over it. The city itself doesn't, because it's not the city's right of way. It's kind of a weird thing there because of that. So what this ordinance is pertaining to is city right of way, where that on McLaughlin is ODOT right of way. So technically our ordinance would not cover McLaughlin, but I believe the planning code, when they come in to develop that property or a piece of property, the planning code states what needs to be in there. And I'm guessing, I don't know this 100%, but I believe that ODOT would also have that in their standards as well.
Okay,
I'm not 100%.
is there a way to check? Because I know car dealerships don't like trees because they mess up their cars.
Well, yeah.
Although it kind of depends on the business, I believe, because up McLaughlin, there are several places that do have trees. They're very well manicured out in front of their property, which kind of surprised me as well.
I've seen that, but if you've ever waited for a bus in any of those places that don't have trees, it's pretty gruesome.
Anything else ordinance wise? Okay. So we'll make some of these changes, look at them. I know Brittany's going to pass this on to her colleagues as well. If there's anything that you come up with between now and the next meeting, please send that to either myself or Kristen so that we can get that on the list. And I believe the next coming from here, we'll bring back an ordinance that has all of your comments or changes that need to be made. And then hopefully we can have everything ready to go to the council meeting on the 23rd of July. The next meeting will be July 12th, not the 5th, correct. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.